The fact is that any event that occurs in history, no matter how trivial, sends a sort of ripple effect through history, so that God's morally sufficient reasons for permitting it might not emerge until centuries from now in another country.
To suppose that Yahweh allows suffering in order to achieve some greater good implies that Yahweh is not capable of achieving his goals without allowing suffering, which implies that he is not omnipotent. Craig would probably reply that omnipotence doesn't grant the ability to do logically contradictory things, and that Yahweh's goals may be such that achieving them without suffering would be logically contradictory. However, the only goal that is logically impossible to achieve without suffering is suffering itself, or something to which suffering is conceptually inherent. Why would a benevolent God have such a goal?
And therefore it's simply impossible for the atheist to show that it's improbable or impossible that God has morally sufficient reasons for permitting the evil and suffering in the world, particularly when we keep in mind the Christian concept of God and the Christian purpose of suffering. It is not to produce happiness in this life. I grant it. It is rather to provide a context in which people may freely respond to God and his offer of eternal life and forgiveness and come to know him. And it may be that only in a world that is suffused with suffering of a natural and moral sort that the maximum number of people would freely come to know God and his eternal life.
I don't see why suffering is a necessary component or consequence of permitting humans to freely choose whether or not to worship a god. In fact, it seems to undermine that freedom by disincentivizing rebellion. But if suffering is, for some reason, necessary to this freedom, I don't understand how allowing this freedom is benevolent. Wanting that kind of freedom is like wishing that your parents gave you the freedom to wander into traffic as a kid. If suffering is the consequence of sin, why would a benevolent God allow us to even have the capacity to be tempted by sin?
Now, I don't doubt Professor Craig doesn't want to believe that there are no objective moral values. Hey, I don't want to believe it, but this isn't an exercise in wishful thinking. So even if its first premise were true, and Craig could show that, and he hasn't, his moral argument still hardly offers much of a riposte to the evidential problem of evil.
I've only ever heard Craig give two arguments in favor of objective moral values. One is, deep down we all know it, which Arif Ahmed rightly pointed out wouldn't pass for an argument anywhere outside of a theological seminary, and the other is that objective moral values exist because a God exists. Neither of these are going to be convincing at all to an atheist who doesn't believe in objective morality.